Good afternoon, students. Today I'm going to be lecturing on the vice of anger or wrath. I prefer the term wrath, and the reason that I prefer the term wrath is because A, it's not used often in our vocabulary. B, uh, I most certainly side with the tradition that says that anger is sometimes permissible and even obligatory. There may be cases where you ought to be, or I ought to be angry. And the fact that I'm not angry is actually a defect in me. So I'll use the term wrath more often than I use the term anger. Um, but nevertheless, you'll get the idea. We're talking about a vice here. We're not talking about something that is permissible or something that is even obligatory. In my previous lecture on greed, I failed to talk about the relationship between greed and the garden, and I told you I'd do that for all of them. So remember, greed is the desire for material possessions, it's the desire for money and all the things that money can buy. And remember, greed starts, it gets the values right. The greedy heart ends up valuing things incorrectly. Right? This is the sign of the greedy heart, is that it values things incorrectly. And so I think we do see greed show up in the Garden of Eden, perhaps in a number of ways. A trivial way in which it shows up is you might think that Eve, or at this point in the story, she actually hasn't been given a name. The woman, you might think is greedy just in that she wants this thing that she's not supposed to have, right? And so maybe greed is working here. There's some material item in her midst. She's not supposed to have it. She's not supposed to possess it or eat it. And so she says, screw that. I'm going to possess it. I'm going to eat it. And so you might think that, okay, maybe there's some greed going on here, right? She desires more than she should, right? Her desire for a material possession is excessive, right? She's not supposed to desire to possess that thing, and nevertheless she does. So it's an excessive desire for a particular type of possession, namely the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so there's that. There's also, clearly I think there's also uh, her values are disordered, right? And so here it seems like, right, she's valuing knowing good and evil as God knows it more than she values obedience to God. Now, you might think that actually it's Adam that is screwed up here, because Adam, it seems like, relayed the command to Eve, or the woman, poorly, right? The woman thinks you're not supposed to touch any tree in the middle of the garden. And so that would suggest that maybe Adam told her, don't touch any tree in the garden, and that wasn't the command. And so maybe Adam doesn't value getting God's word right. God said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God did not say, do not eat from any tree in the middle of the garden. And so maybe Adam doesn't value God's word properly. And Adam relayed God's word to the woman, or Eve, incorrectly, demonstrating his lack of, that he doesn't value God's word in the appropriate way. So there's a disordered values going on. I think there is some greed here, in even just a trivial sense, desiring to possess some material thing that one shouldn't. But I'm not gonna, so you might think of better ways, better sort of applications of the vice of greed to the garden story. Remember, my goal here is simply to show you that through the lens of the vice tradition, Scripture can come alive in ways maybe it hasn't come alive for you. All right, we're going to move on to the vice of wrath. And before we talk about the vice of wrath, it's crucial that we talk about anger as an emotion, anger as a feeling. And so the way that I'll describe anger is exactly the way Aquinas describes anger. Aquinas says anger is a response to a perceived injustice. So anger, the emotion of anger, is a response to a perceived injustice. So you can think of it like this. I experience the emotion of anger because I am perceiving or I'm construing a particular situation as though it involves an act of injustice or some injustice. So I perceive injustice and I experience the emotion of anger. I mean, maybe they're one and the same. The perception of the injustice, anger is aroused simultaneously, but that is Aquinas' understanding of the nature of anger. I think it's brilliant. I think it's fascinating. So think of any time you've experienced anger. Now, I'm not talking about the vice of wrath here. I'm talking about just the normal emotional response of anger. And by the way, some of you might say, well, I just never get angry. My wife is probably one of them, right? She rarely gets angry about anything. My mom rarely gets angry about anything, and that angers me. I wish they'd get more angry about stuff. I, on the other hand, as you can see right now, get way more angry than I should. So this is definitely a vice that I really need to watch out for. Or these are habits, attitudes I need to really, really, really be careful about. Okay, so some of you might say, I never get really angry, I'm fine, this is fine. Okay, well, what I want you to think about is times you're annoyed, times you're frustrated, times you're a little impatient, times, maybe you're, I don't know, a bit, any kind of upset to your situation or to something that's going on to you. So think of times of annoyance, times of frustration, times of anger, certainly. The idea that Aquinas has is that what's going on here is you're perceiving in your midst some form of injustice that has taken place. Now, normally, anger is a response to a perceived injustice that's done to you or done to me. So I get angry most of the time because I'm perceiving an injustice being done to me. I don't get angry as often when I perceive an injustice being done to you or being done to others. So my anger is mostly directed at injustices done to me, or perceived injustices. So let's talk about that perceived injustice bit. Anger is a response to a perceived injustice. What that means is you're perceiving it. You're thinking it's there. You're construing, interpreting the situation as involving an injustice. Now, it may not involve an injustice. And if so, your anger's bad. This is a bad emotion. This is an emotion that you shouldn't have. It's defective. It's getting the world wrong. So it's a perceived injustice, right? You're perceiving that there's an injustice does not follow that there is. It does not follow that there is an injustice. Just as I perceive that the building is round from 1,000 feet away, it does not follow that the building is round. Okay, so anger is a response to a perceived injustice, to an interpretation of the situation as involving an injustice. Anger goes wrong, and here's where wrath enters the picture. Wrath is anger gone wrong. Anger goes wrong when the object of the anger is either not real, or when anger is directed at a real object. There's a real injustice, but it's directed in a wrong way. Okay, so let me repeat that. Anger goes wrong, and this is when the vice of wrath or wrath-like tendencies, behaviors, attitudes are entering into the picture. Anger goes wrong when there is no injustice, so you shouldn't have any anger at all, or when there is an injustice, but you're too angry, or you're angry for too long about the injustice, or maybe there really isn't. I mean, this is a rare case, but maybe there really is an injustice, and you're not angry at all about it. You should be angry, but you're not angry too long. In those cases, uh, that wouldn't be the vice of wrath. That would be a different vice you'd be struggling with. All right, so let me repeat. Anger goes wrong when you're angry and you shouldn't be because there is no injustice, or you're angry and it's good that you're angry. It's okay that you're angry, but you're angry for too long. You're angry too quickly. Your anger is too high. The degree of your anger is greater than the injustice that the anger is aimed at. So in those cases, wrath, or at least wrath tendencies, vicious tendencies, are setting in. And the danger, of course, is that we place ourselves at the center, and then what happens is I start making demands on others and the world that are not reasonable. Maybe these are demands that would only make sense if I'm God. Maybe what I'm doing is I'm demanding respect that's either not due to me, or it's not due to it's not due to me at the level that I'm demanding it. Okay? Here's a fascinating case. In Numbers chapter 12, God's anger is aroused when Aaron and Miriam speak against Moses. Now, Aaron and Miriam are Moses' brother and sister. And Aaron and Miriam are belittling, mocking, gossiping to the other Israelites about Moses. Moses is a servant of God to whom God speaks face to face. Okay, so Moses has this really tight, fascinating relationship with God. Aaron and Miriam are speaking poorly about Moses to the Israelites. And so there's an injustice here, and here's where the injustice is. They treat Moses as if they were equals with him in the eyes of God. But God has set apart Moses, and Aaron and Miriam are refusing to acknowledge Moses' special position. And so in that way, they're violating the demands of justice, and they incite the anger of God. They want to be treated as Moses is treated, and they're offended that they're not treated as Moses is treated, that they don't have the same role and function in the purposes or the plans of God. So what this reveals is this: justice, and this, by the way, is agreed upon by most philosophical thinking about at least generalized justice. Justice demands that equals be treated equally, and this is crucial, that unequals be treated unequally. I'm going to repeat that. Justice demands that equals be treated equally, and that unequals be treated unequally. Okay, so the first part is very simple, right? So if X and Y are equal to one another, and I treat X completely different than Y, then it looks like I'm doing something that is unjust. If X and Y are equal to each other in the relevant respect. So let's say X and Y are students, and both students, have turned in all their work. They've turned in all their, they've gotten the exact same grades on everything. I give X student an A, and I give Y student a C. X and Y are equal with respect to everything relevant for getting a grade in the class, for getting the same grade in the class, and nevertheless I'm treating them unequally. So I am committing an act of injustice because I'm failing to treat equals equally. Okay, got it? But justice also demands that we treat unequals unequally. So think about it like this. If I treat my 5-year-old the same way I treat my 16-year-old, in various cases I will be acting unjustly. So if my 16-year-old wants to stay out till 10, but my 5-year-old has to go to bed at, let's say, 8, and I tell my 16-year-old, look, your 5-year-old brother has to go to bed at 8, so you have to go to bed at 8. My 16-year-old's going to say, but look, we're not equal in the relevant respect. I'm 11 years older. I should have a later bedtime. Similarly, if my 16-year-old wants to drive the car and has their driver's license, and my 5-year-old wants to drive the car, and I say, well, justice demands that I treat equals equally. I'm allowing my 16-year-old to drive the car, so I guess I better allow my 5-year-old to drive the car. Well, no, I'm an idiot, right? So justice demands that equals be treated equally and the unequals be treated unequally when there's a relevant inequality. And so justice requires that we properly recognize equality and inequality and treat them as such. So when we fail to do so, God's anger is aroused, and ours should be as well. But our anger should be primarily focused on mistreatments of God and God's people, and not on mistreatments of ourselves. That's the best way to make sure your anger is going well, is if you try not to get angry when injustices are done to you, and you try to develop or cultivate an attitude or a habit where your anger is more likely to be aroused when injustices are committed against others or against God, attempted injustices towards God. If you can cultivate that in you, you're well on your way to having proper anger. So for me, probably the best thing, since I'm by nature more of an angry, intense person, for me, the best thing to do is to try to not get angry when I'm treated unjustly, and to direct my anger when you're treated unjustly or when God is treated unjustly. Moses does this. In fact, Moses is called the humblest or meekest, the humblest or meekest human on earth. And part of the reason Moses is considered the most humble or the most meek human on earth is because when Moses is mocked and scorned, he doesn't do a thing. When God is mocked, Moses gets angry. So Moses directs his anger towards injustices committed against God or others. And that's what makes Moses the most humble, the most meek. So our anger is directed at injustices, and what anger is supposed to do is to bring about the reestablishment of justice. So when my anger is properly portrayed, it will always work towards bringing about justice, reconciliation, or the balancing of the scales, right? Proper anger, virtuous, righteous anger is never destructive, but it's always constructive. It builds up. It never tears down ultimately. Sometimes tearing down has to occur in order for building up to occur, of course. But the object of anger is the reestablishment of justice, the bringing about of justice. And so you can think about all sorts of cases where anger just doesn't make any sense. My favorite case that I bring up in class is when I get cut off, and especially like when I'm driving, the kind of anger that I really need to work on is when I'm in a line in traffic, and the cones are out in a line next to me, right? And they're forcing everybody over into like the far right lane, into one lane. And so, generally speaking, as soon as I'm aware that that's what's happening, I try to move over into the far right lane. And then some idiot, forgive me, will drive by and go all the way up to where the cones, to where you can't even drive anymore because the cones are blocking. Then they'll put on their blinker and try to cut in front of everybody. Right? If that's you, don't do it again. Right? So this drives me nuts, as you can see. Pray for my soul. It makes me angry when I see people do this. Part of the reason it makes me angry that I see people do this is those people are cowards. They would never do that in the line at the grocery store. Could you imagine someone in a long line at the grocery store taking their cart and just jamming it in at the beginning right near the cashier? Of course no one's going to do that. Or at the bank, we're all in a super long line at the bank and it's super clear exactly where the queue is and they just walk to the front. People don't do that in the United States, right? We have queues, we wait in line, blah, blah, blah. So when people cut like that, right, in cars, they're only doing it because there's a kind of anonymity involved. They would never do it at the grocery store, or at the bank, right? These people drive me nuts. Okay, but notice my anger, right? My anger is too intense. It does not match the injustice that has been committed. What's the injustice that has been committed? I have to wait in traffic for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. Now, if too many people do it, maybe I have to wait in traffic for 30 more minutes. There is an injustice there, I think. Right? There is something that is not okay. Right? They're getting an advantage that nobody else is getting, and they ought not to get it. They're wanting to be treated unequally, get to the front of the line rather than equally, and there's no difference between them and us. So I think there is an injustice, but my anger is way too intense for the type of injustice there. It's a minor, tiny, tiny, tiny little injustice, and it makes me crazy. My anger is too long. As you can see, I'm still angry about these things that have happened a long time ago. And maybe I get angry too easily at these sorts of things. So our anger has to be directed at the right object, that is the injustice, and it has to be the right level of anger, right? So if it's a tiny injustice, it's got to be a tiny amount of anger. Short injustice, it's got to be short anger. The other thing to notice here is that rarely is our anger directed at the right thing. How many of you are really angry? Do you really experience the emotion of anger with respect to all sorts of oppression that's taking place all over the world, in our own country and in countries elsewhere? The oppression of women, the oppression of Christians, the oppression of minorities, the oppression of children. Are you angry about starvation that is due to political negligence or thievery? Are you angry about abortion that is committed, through callousness? Are you angry about blank, where blank is something that is clearly terrible? Does that arise, are you way more angry when it's a little injustice committed against you? These are great tests for us. Our anger is to mirror God's anger, right? If our anger is to mirror God's anger, then we need to know what the heck God gets angry about. And in order to know what God gets angry about, guess what? We got to know, what does he love and what does he hate? What does he not love? And of course, Scripture tells us, the Bible tells us, and I think we can even know some of this stuff without even appeal to Scripture, right? It is good to be angry, and it is good to hate all those things that get in the way of genuine love, of human flourishing, that get in the way of loving God, right? We want to get rid of those things. That's where our anger should be directed. So anything that blocks God's glory, anything that blocks union with God and union with others, is something worth getting angry about. Whatever blocks those things are things that are opposed to love. They're opposed to human well-being. They're opposed to human flourishing. And so those are clear cases of injustice, and those are cases that are worth getting angry about. And notice that in almost all of those cases, those will be things that are directed, right? Those will be things that are directed towards actions, not persons. So notice in my own case, I get angry with myself when I sin. I get angry at the sin, right? Damn that sin, I want to say. Literally, curse it. Curse the sin. But I don't really get super angry at me. Right? My anger isn't really directed as much at me as at the action I performed. And so similarly, when that person cuts me off, my anger shouldn't be directed towards him or her. It should be directed towards the act. Right? Otherwise, instead of wanting the act to be eliminated, my anger will result in wanting the person to be eliminated. St. Paul in Galatians illustrates anger in a fascinating way. So I'm going to read from Galatians chapter 2, starting at verse 11. But when Cephas is Peter, but when Cephas, came to Antioch, I, Paul, opposed him to his face, because he had clearly done wrong. Until certain people came from James, he had been eating with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he stopped doing this and separated himself because he was afraid of those who were pro-circumcision. And the rest of the Jews also joined with him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray with them by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not behaving consistently with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, Peter, in front of them all, if you, although you are a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you try to force the Gentiles to live like Jews? Okay. Notice what Paul's doing. By the way, I mean, think about this. Paul is speaking pretty crazy here, right? He's super intense. Paul says, I oppose him to his face, right? I mean, these are like fighting words, right? Paul's getting in his face, it sounds like. In front of everyone, he's challenging Peter on this. Notice what Paul is ticked off about. Peter is treating equals unequally. So go back to that Moses story in Numbers. Aaron and Miriam are angry, and they shouldn't be, because they think they're equals in a certain respect, and they're not. Notice what I'm not saying is that, they're loved differently by God or cherished differently by God or anything. My point is they have a different role in God's plan than Moses. They want Moses' role. God, speak to me face to face, right? Let me be your spokesperson, right? So they're ticked off, right? They see an injustice where there is none. They want to be treated just like Moses is. Paul is ticked off at Peter because Peter is treating equals unequally. So Miriam and Aaron are treating an unequal, they want to treat an unequal equally, injustice. Peter wants to treat equals unequally, injustice. Peter wants to treat equals, Gentile and Jewish Christians, he wants to treat them differently. He wants to make the Gentiles have rules and restrictions that he himself and other Christian Jews do not have. And so Paul is ticked off at this distortion of the gospel. All right, so what then does anger pervert? What's the good thing that anger perverts? Well, the good thing, I mean, in a sense, is obvious, what is wrath? The good thing that wrath perverts in an obvious sense is it perverts anger. It perverts righteous anger. It takes righteous, holy, constructive, beautiful, healing anger. Anger can be healing. You should be angry at slavery if there is some in your midst. You should be angry at the fact that there are more slaves that exist today than ever in the history of the world. You should be angry that young girls in Asia, in India, in China, in all over the world are more likely to be aborted than any boy, right? That should tick you off. You should be angry and do something about it. It should motivate you to do something about it, right? That's what anger's supposed to do. It's to motivate us to be healers. It's to motivate us to want to seek justice. Now, be careful. Right? There's a phenomena alive and well called social justice warriors, and one of the worries that people have with social justice warriors is that their anger is a whimper, right? They yell and scream and whatnot online and do nothing real about the actual injustice. And B, the worry is that a lot of social justice warriors are getting the injustices wrong. They don't know what they're talking about, right? So they're clueless as to the actual injustices that are being committed, or they're clueless as to the actual remedies that need to be put in place for those injustices to be eliminated. Okay, so you got to be careful. You got to be careful, right? But anger, good, righteous anger is holy. It moves us towards compassion and love, towards those who are facing injustice. It moves us towards healing. Okay, so wrath, in a sense, we can put it like this: wrath perverts the beautiful, the good of anger, of righteous anger, of healing injustices. It perverts this inclination in all of us to eliminate injustice. That's what wrath does. We see it in the garden, right? I think we see wrath in the garden. I think this is fascinating. When I think Eve, the woman, when the serpent is talking to her and says, "Hey, you don't know good and evil the way God does, and if you eat that thing, if you disobey, you're going to know good and evil just the way God does. You're going to be equal with God." And so what's going on here is I think the serpent is pointing out an inequality. God knows good and evil in this way. You don't. That's an inequality. That's a big difference. And the serpent's trying to sort of make the woman, make Eve see that, perceive that as an injustice. It's not right that there's this inequality between you and God. It's not right that he gets to know good and evil in this way and you don't. That's unjust. You can rectify the injustice. All you got to do is eat from that forbidden tree. So I think there's a perception of an injustice in the fall, and it's a misperception. And if that's true, if that's an accurate interpretation of what's going on, we see, the seeds of the vice of wrath already in the fall. Offspring for anger are really easy to come up with, right? The ones that Dr. DeYoung points out are, we tend to demean the person who's performed the injustice. So think about the ways that we might think of Hitler. Think about the ways you might think of Donald Trump or Barack Obama, whichever side of the political aisle you're on. We demean those that we think perform injustice. By demean, what I mean is we make them even less than image bearers of God. We eliminate their value. It results anger. Another offspring or daughter vice of wrath is revenge, right? In action or thought. If you've ever watched Seinfeld, George Costanza is a great example of a guy who has revenge in thought all the time. Outbursts, insults, blasphemy, right? We blaspheme against God. We shake our fist at God in anger and then utter all sorts of untruths about him. So, by the way, blasphemy technically is really just, it's almost like gossiping about God. So when I gossip about another, in general, one of the things that's bad about gossip is that oftentimes it involves falsity, right? Oftentimes it involves me lying about or saying false things about another person. Blasphemy is saying false things, proclaiming false things about God. And anger can make us do that. Injury and, of course, murder. Murder is definitely an offspring. In fact, most of the tradition has thought that murder is where anger's always headed. Now, it rarely gets there for us, but that's the heart of anger. That's where it's going if we let it develop in us, and then if all the constraints that are normally upon us are removed. Some of the remedies that Dr. DeYoung talks about, I think she talks about a journal, record every time we get angry and why. That will help us see, where is it going wrong. Knowing God's character, I think, is a big one. What does God love? What does God get angry about? And then try to mirror that in appropriate ways. Obviously, we're not God. Okay, check the blog. I'll be posting this video soon, as well as some extra credit assignments.